Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to an inaugural virtual Books on Wine evening with a tasting component. For those of you who have the wines made by the 5 winemakers you will be seeing this evening, what a wonderful experience. For those of you who have cellars, for those of you who have good intentions, for those of you who are just curious for more or some information, welcome. We have before us 5 local practitioners and 2 authors, not that far flung, they're in San Jose. And then we have our moderator who 5 years ago was giving her own Books on Wine evening for us at the St. Helena Public Library. There were a couple more winemakers familiar to the Gilberts that have their biographies included in their work, Women Winemakers, Personal Odysseys. They have in common not only their gender, but the curious commonality that every one of these wineries has an R in it. When Kelli came to give her presentation at the public library, she had just authored a book, Napa Valley Then and Now, which she had not yet seen except on screen. And she said when the size and weight and mass of it arrived, in fact, she cried. It's a very large, quite wonderful book. She is an irrepressible redhead. We're delighted to have her as our moderator. In the course of her Books on Wine evening with the public library, sponsored by the Napa Valley Wine Library, she was asked what kind of influence that women had in the audience with respect to wine writing. And Kelli said, most wine writers are writing for men. However, using words like curvy, ample, seductive, the slowest striptease of a Margot. Well, why not chiseled, firefighter, ticklish, 3-day stubble? There's room. And so this evening with you, with Kelli, we're going to explore that room. Kelli White. Can we unmute her and have her moderate? I give you Kelli White, author and director of education of the Pacific Union Company here in Napa Valley and the Bay Area.
Thank you so much, Diana. I appreciate it.
A great pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate that introduction. I had forgotten all about that. That was a long time ago, and I have repressed my free speaking from that evening, but thank you for reminding me. Yes, I'm all for equal opportunity in all things, even objectification in language. So let's it's a good start to the evening. So thank you, and thank you to the St. Helena Library for inviting me. I'm a big fan of the libraries in general, and this library in particular, for performing such a wonderful public service and good, and also just being a beautiful, wonderful place to spend an afternoon, either inside or outside in the library vineyard. It's one of my favorite places in all of Napa Valley. So it's an honor for me to be here. And it's an honor for me to introduce our authors and this wonderful book, which hopefully everybody watching along at home already has, Women Winemakers, Personal Odysseys. I loved this book. It was very compelling. Subject matter is right up my alley. And I'm very excited to discuss this really important subject matter with everyone here today. We are also blessed with 5 incredible female winemakers. The word female is unnecessary. You can just say 5 incredible winemakers because they certainly are. And I have so much respect and admiration for all of them. So glad that you'll be tasting some wonderful wines from each of them, which we will get to in short order because we want you drinking, we want your candid questions, we want your participation in this conversation. And that's very much hopefully what this will be. So The winemakers are each going to speak in order that we've selected according to the wines, about the wines, etc. And then we're going to open up the floor to all of us, the 5 winemakers, the 2 authors, and myself. And we're going to have what we hope to be an interesting and dynamic conversation that touches upon everybody's personal journey, the inspiration behind the book, etc. But we do welcome audience participation and audience questions. So don't feel like you need to hold those to the end. Let them rip. We're going to keep track and pepper them throughout as they come up and are appropriate. So please feel free to submit. And with that, I'm going to release the microphone to Celia Welch, who's going to talk us through her beautiful white wine that she submitted for this event this evening. So thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And it's just a real honor to be in this company. When I was first studying to be a winemaker, I really had no idea where this journey would take me. And way back then in the late 70s, early 80s, I think I was aspiring to perhaps one day, if I was really successful, maybe be able to work in a wine lab or something like that. The idea of being a winemaker and consultant just absolutely never crossed my mind as a young woman, although I would say I was certainly looking to the examples of some of the women that were a little ahead of me in this career. So it's been quite a path. The wine that I wanted to share with everybody tonight is actually, it's not a Napa Valley wine at all. I was born and raised in Southern Oregon, a town called Medford, Oregon, which was, when I was a child there, most famous for Harry and David's pears. So that was the biggest employer in the valley, and the pears were absolutely delicious. And so I grew up knowing what really, really good fresh fruit tastes like. And as I developed my career and my palate and my methodology, I wanted to do a white wine that was perhaps something that broke a few rules. After trying to fit into the look and the feel of a winemaker by dressing very androgynously, having short hair and so forth, I think that part of my journey, my evolution has been to be able to say, not all these rules need to apply to me. I'm going to break a few. So I've made a white wine. It's called Corra Tail Feathers, and it looks like it might be a Sauvignon Blanc. It's not a Sauvignon Blanc. It is a blend of 3 varieties that are not normally blended together. It's a very light Muscat, a little bit of Riesling, and some Viognier. So ostensibly wines that you might find in 3 very different countries or 3 different regions that wouldn't necessarily go together. That's low in alcohol. It's about 12.5 alcohol, dry. So it's a great summertime. It's almost 100 degrees here in Napa today. We're having a little bit of a heat spike. And something really cool and crisp, good acidity, dry. It's just a very refreshing light wine. So this is my kind of go-to with melons or cold seafood or gazpacho or whatever it is that we're all trying to enjoy in these warm summer months. And I make this from fruit that is actually grown just across the border north of us in Southern Oregon, in part because the season is a little bit shorter there, and so the acidity in the fruit just tends to hold a little better than it might in a slightly warmer climate like where we are making all these great Napa Valley Cabernets. So I wanted to do something that was a little different, a little bit less than mainstream, and I think that maybe in some ways that kind of mirrors my career. I hope that anybody that is tasting it will hit me with any questions you might have, and if you haven't tasted it yet, don't be afraid of what the varietal mix is. A lot of folks look at that and say, oh, I don't really care for wines that are sweet. And this particular one is actually made in a very, very dry style. So anyway, that's what I have about Corra Tail Feathers, and I hope people will give it a try and enjoy it. Back to you, Kelli.
Okay, great. Thank you, Celia. That was really, really great. Next, we're going to talk to Pam Starr, Crocker and Starr, who has a Cabernet Franc to taste us on.
Thank you, Kelli. And thank you all for having me join in. I'm super excited to be with my colleagues that are on. I wish every colleague in the book that Lucia and Jack wrote could be with us today, because it would be an amazing event to see all of the faces and hear all of the journeys. As I near the end of my 3rd decade of winemaking, I have been graced and blessed with so many great experiences. I never really thought I was going to start my own winery, and much like many women who graduated in Davis in the early 80s, wasn't really necessarily the title of winemaker that I felt like that was going to be bequeathed to me. I feel like Zamalong was really a trailblazer when it came to being the first president winemaker of a company. And I feel like that was a good turning point for me, especially since I didn't think I was going into winemaking. Dental school was sort of on my docket. I kind of bypassed that one. And so today I brought to you a wine that I launched my company with over 2.5 decades ago. I launched Crocker and Starr Winery with 100 cases of Cabernet Franc. And so today I'm sharing with you our new and second Cabernet Franc. It's a Cabernet Franc blend, and it is 60% Cab Franc and 34% Merlot and a little bit of Malbec. It's 100% from the Crocker Vineyard, which is my partner. I started this company wanting to continue my journey as a terroir East. I love soil. I love how it reflects in the grapes, and I love that it ultimately reflects in a bottle of wine. And so my journey for the first couple of decades of winemaking really had to do with discovery of what grapes, the same grapes, express themselves in different soil profiles. And when I met the Crocker Vineyard, I was making wines for Mary Novak across town in St. Helena, and I followed an old soils map across town, and I met this 1870s winery estate on the southeast side of St. Helena, and it hadn't been transitioned into a single vineyard wine since Prohibition. It's actually an old 1870s winery estate called James Dowdell and Sons. And I'm very grateful to a phone call that I received in 1996 from a man named Charlie Crocker, who said, "Oh, I understand that you would like to buy some grapes for me." And I said, "Well, no, but I understand that you would like to start a wine for your vineyard." And he said, "No." But he invited me to come to his office in San Francisco. So I'm very grateful. It was a great day for me. I went down to the big city in the early parts of 1997. And I have to say that getting off on the 25th floor of One Post Street in my best winemaker jeans, I felt a hair out of place. But I'm really grateful to this very gracious gentleman who spent 3 hours with me, and we shook hands that day, and Crocker and Starr was born. And the two of us started an equal partnership. We have put the exact same amount of sweat and blood and tears and dollars into this company. And so it's taken 24 years to go from 100 cases of Cabernet Franc to now a 4,000 case winery. We actually have our own building. I'm so proud. I saw Cathy Corison erect hers down the street, and I'm like, oh God, one day, just like, one day. And I think that this business, this crazy professional business that we live in, garners people, brings them forward that have passion and purpose, pride, and certainly a strong back. And hopefully all of you who have taken in this wine today will pop the cork and find that it's not like any Cabernet Franc you've ever had. I wanted my identity to be with a set of roots, and part of the partnering with this vineyard was that the Cabernet Franc is exquisite. It has all the goodies that I want in my Franc: floral, spice, cardamom. Karen McNeil calls it non-fruitedness. I love that. I love that word. I use it with Cabernet Franc. The Merlot that's in this wine, it's 100% from the estate. The Merlot that's in this wine is like a lock and load classic combination between two grape varieties that find themselves as a whole when they don't make themselves as a single. And then the little bit of Malbec is a creative way of an homage to pre-phylloxera in Bordeaux. Malbec was a very, very strong and utilized grape variety in Bordeaux before phylloxera took over, and rootstocks was the next wave of grape plantings there. So again, I'm honored and thrilled to be with this group. I feel like I've weathered so many different vintages, and beginning the harvest is like, for me, being a kid in a candy store and pulling up all the good and spicy ones and laying them out and tasting them and smelling them every day. So I'm really excited. We're launching harvest with a great group of people. Thank you so much for having me. Back to you, Kelly.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you. And for our next winemaker, we have Sally Johnson Blum of Pride.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor for me to be included in this group. I attended UC Davis. I got a master's degree there in the late 90s. And as my fellow students and I started our careers, the 4 amazing women featured here today alongside myself were some of our real heroes we aspired to someday follow in those footsteps, and I'm just so honored to be here today. I actually remember about 10 years ago, I was invited to be a part of a women winemakers dinner at a restaurant in Walnut Creek called Prima, and Celia, you were there, and Sandi was also there. And at the end of the night, I'd had a little wine, I got my courage up, and I came up to you and I said, Celia, I just need to tell you, you're such an inspiration to me, and I'm really amazed by everything you've done. And you started laughing and said, that's so funny because I just said all those same things to Sandi Belcher. So I think it's so great the way we women in the industry are so collaborative, inspired by each other, and supportive of each other. That's something that's really special. I'm not from wine country. I'm originally from Ann Arbor, Michigan, from the Midwest. And I didn't really grow up in a wine drinking family, but my parents were really into gardening. My dad and mom had a huge garden. They would pickle, they would preserve. My dad even made some fruit wines and had a way too big of a hobby orchard and beehives. And so we just had this like very free range kind of fun childhood. Both of my parents are scientists, so I was kind of, you know, encouraged to go in that direction and do whatever I wanted to do as long as it was some form of science. So I attended the University of Michigan and started studying botany, biology, kind of thinking I might go down that path, possibly like Pam, to some type of pharmaceutical or medical, dental. And then I ended up doing a study abroad program in France. And that's really where I fell in love with wine and just with the connection to the seasons and the lifestyle, just the pace of being so in touch with the earth and something that goes back so far throughout our history. So at that point, I decided to apply to grad school. I started out in the viticulture program at UC Davis, and then I noticed that the winemaking students seemed to be having a lot more fun. So I quickly transitioned into that, and I've been making wine for over 20 years now, and I've been at Pride for 13 years. So I brought today our Cabernet Sauvignon. This is a wine that I just think is so synonymous with Napa Valley, so I wanted to feature that. It's actually a 2017, and I'm sure that the 5 of us here will never forget that vintage. It was quite exciting and challenging. That was the year that we had fires throughout the Napa Valley, and some of us, including me, still had fruit hanging on those vines. So it was definitely a stressful time, but it was a time that I really was able to come together with my team, and even my owner, Steve Pride, was right there doing pump overs with me and helping out, and we were sneaking past police lines to get up to the winery and be able to continue bringing fruit gotten a little bit closer to the coast than the other side of the Napa Valley, the Vaca Mountains. So we got some great wind, and we never actually got smoke up at Pride, and I was able to test all of my lots and ensure that there's no smoke in there, and I'm just so excited about the way it came out. What I love about Pride, we get so much sunshine being up high at 2,100 feet, so we get these great, intense, concentrated tannic flavors. But what I really love about our wines is the voluptuousness of the mid-palate. So finding that balance is really what I'm going for in my winemaking. So I hope that any of you who have the opportunity to come up to visit us at Pride will do so. It's really beautiful. We're right on the county line, so about half of our vineyards are in the Napa Valley and half are in Sonoma, and it makes for some fun paperwork challenges for me, and it's just a great place to be. So Kelli, back to you.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much. And up next we have Cathy Corison of Corison Winery.
Hi. Am I live? What a treat. It's just fast forward all these decades and to have this wonderful cohort of women to making wine in the Napa Valley is just so gratifying for me. I fell in love with wine I was studying biology at Pomona College. I was 19 years old. Wine grabbed me by the neck and ran with me. And for all the usual reasons I fell in love with wine, it's delicious, you share it with friends, but for me it was layered in on top of that was the fact that it's a whole series of living systems. So I'm still, all these years later, studying biology because wine is very much alive. Graduated 2 years later, 2 days after that, I was in the Napa Valley with the vague notion that I wanted to make world-class wine. I don't think I even fully understood what that meant, but showed up in June of 1975, and then the Paris tasting happened in 1976, and that catapulted the Napa Valley onto the world stage in a way that none of us could have even hoped for, and I feel like I've been hanging on for dear life ever since. And so made wine for other people for a long time, mostly in the hills, most notably at Chapelay Vineyard for all the 1980s. And during my tenure there came to be a wine inside of me that needed to get out. And that wine was powerful. Cabernet is always going to be powerful. It doesn't matter how you grow it, how you make it. But for me, at the intersection of elegance, it becomes much more interesting. They sound like opposites, but they can be in the same glass at the same time. So I've spent my entire adult life chasing that. Cabernet Sauvignon from the Napa Valley that is powerful and elegant, graces the table, has a long, interesting life, and speaks of where it grew. So I'm showing again, the 2017, I don't know if that shows, 2017 Corison Napa Valley Cabernet. This is the wine that I established the label on 34 years ago. 34 years ago. I'm about to do my 34th vintage. I knew that I needed, for this wine in my head, I needed to go down to what we called the Rutherford Bench in those days, and that's the alluvial soils coming out of the Western Hills. And that's where the wines were built the way I needed them to be. They have good, snappy, natural acidity. If we're careful with the canopies, the tannins come into the winery feeling like velvet. They tend to be very complex, with including all the bright red and blue fruit ends of the Cabernet Sauvignon flavor spectrum. And they also are incredibly aromatic, which was important to me. So as a very young adult, I was still making the wine at Chapelay. I started to buy grapes in barrels instead of cars and houses. And fast forward to now. So I hope you're all having a chance to enjoy it. And I'd like to say a little something about the 17 vintage. It's known for two things. One, it got very hot when it was at picking time, and of course the fires. I picked very early, so my grapes had been in for more than 3 weeks when the fires came, but we still had to deal with the heat. But that summer had been very moderate, in fact, almost cold. The temperatures in August were very moderate, mostly in the 80s, and even dipped down to 70 degrees at one point. So that's why I believe the 17s are really beautiful. The belly of the ripening season was perfect. So cheers.
Cheers to that. Thank you, Cathy. And finally, we've got Sandi Belcher of Arns showing us her Syrah.
My name is Sandi Belcher, and I bet it's 5 o'clock somewhere in the world today. And I appreciate everybody coming to sharpen their palates and learn a little bit about what fine wines and the Napa Valley. And it's a 20-mile long, beautiful stretch of land in the world, and I'm so proud to be a part of it. I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia, on the James River. Graduated from William and Mary at a very young age. I was fortunate enough to be able to skip a few classes, so I got out of high school at 15 and I was in college at 16. So my life has always seemed sort of accelerated. I applied to school at UC Davis because I wanted to go to veterinarian school. I was so much into the land and the earth and animals and yada, yada, yada. And I got to Davis at about the age of 18, 19, and the first 2 years were very rough for me. I was like, oh God, I can't stand the blood and guts and gore. But so I changed my major to agriculture and chemistry, and I graduated with that. And when I finished school at Davis, I didn't have any money because I was one of 7 kids, and when you leave home, you leave home. So I worked part-time here and there. I worked at Heights Cellars and Chateau Montelena. And then I thought I would take a year, year and a half off and go see what the rest of the world was doing in the wine business. And it just hit me. It was like a baseball bat over the head. I just love the industry. I love the smell of the grapes. And it reminded me a lot of my childhood because I grew up around corn and cotton and all sorts of agricultural products. And our whole life was agriculture. So I went to Australia and I worked a harvest down there, and I met a really cool gal who was from Italy. And she says, well, I have to go back home to my parents' winery. You want to come with me? And I said, sure. So I went with Beta to Vieti Winery in Alba, Italy, and spent several months there working. It's really funny. You can go out and pick Arns in the snow in October. So I learned a lot about their white wines. And then I went from there to France, and I spent a year and a half traveling around different regions. I got homesick. I wanted to come back. I lived on Englewood Avenue. I had 8 acres there and 8 acres of red grapes. And I made homemade wine, and we also sold grapes. And I ran into this guy named Bob Long. He was doing a white winery, white grapes. And I thought, my God, everything I've seen is black. You know, it's Australia, it was heavy duty Shiraz. I did a stint in Thailand, which was Syrah, and that was also reds. And you know, everything was red, red, red. So I thought, well, I'll work a harvest and see how it goes. Well, 20 some odd years later, I'm still there. But in the meantime, I ran into John Arns, and we teamed up in 1985, and we started Arns Winery. And Arns Winery is just above Meadowood Country Club and just below Hell Mountain. We're a stone's throw from Hell Mountain. It's 160 acres with 10 planted acres, all in Cabernet. And we had some really cool clones. John planted this whole thing back in the 60s and 70s. But we had clone 7, clone 6, which didn't produce worth a toot, but the quality was very good. Clone 337, which was produced like hotcakes. So anyway, John and I put our heads together because he was a viticulturalist and I loved what I was doing. So we decided to build our winery, and we bonded it in 1985. And here we are, 2020. So we made some wonderful, and we still are making wonderful Cabernets, long-term aging. You know, when you get into this, you start digging into your soul about who you are and what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I just really love the business. I like the smell of the grapes. I love being in the vineyards. I like watching things grow. I like the way you can manipulate something with shade cloth and make the grapes better. So I've done a lot of experiments at Arns. It's just amazing. But anyway, John came home one day and he said one of his clients, Greg Melanson, who's up on Pritchard Hill, next door to where Cathy Corison worked for years at Chapelet. And John developed that property from the ground up, literally, with the clonal selection. But in the background of all of that, he planted 8 little rows of Syrah. And he asked me if I wanted to make Syrah. And I thought, I don't know, let's go take a look at it. So we did. We went and took a look at it. And it was sitting in a rock pile. They had to import soil to get these vines to grow. John took cuttings from the old Joseph Phelps Syrah vineyards, which Joseph Phelps made back in the 70s, 75 through 79, I believe. So anyway, I said, well, let's try it, So we did. And we started out in 2002, and we brought in, it was like 3 tons or something. It wasn't quite 3 tons. It was, the vines were young. And I treated them like a white variety. I crushed it, whole berried it. I pressed it off. I fermented it. It went into barrel, and it never left the barrel. I never racked it. And my winemaker friends were saying, oh my God, this has been sitting in barrel for 3 years. But it needed it. It was big. It was at 1,400 foot elevation. It was a huge, huge, huge grape. And anyway, I was astonished at the quality of the fruit. So Greg Melanson, who is a very good friend of mine, said every year I could have these grapes. And so I brought the 2013 today. And the 2013 is 100% Syrah. And I kept this, a lot of people kept saying, well, why don't you blend it with a white varietal or whatever, which they do in places like Australia, because the Syrahs in Australia are so big, you can't really bottle them alone. You need to cut it with white wine to tone it down. This wine did not need to be toned down. And so anyway, the 2013, which is in this bottle here we go, is 4 years in French oak, 2-year-old French oak. And I might add that I'm an organic freak. Everything I do in our vineyard at home and abroad, and we do some Chardonnay from the Sonoma coast, is all organic. And it makes a difference when you drink an organically made wine. It's less stress on the vineyards. You get high quality fruit. It's just overall, there's a whole list of reasons why grapevines should be organic. And another thing I feel about it is when I'm in the vineyard tasting those grapes in July and August and in all this heat, and they come in, and when I make a picking decision and you taste that juice at the hopper, and you taste it the whole time you're pumping over and punching down and, working 15-hour days. My whole gig is when it goes into the bottle, it needs to taste the way it tasted in the vineyard. And if you can capture that as a winemaker, I mean, that's really where it's at. And then when you can have, I have had people calling me recently because I did a library selection. And people are emailing me back saying, God, your 92 is incredible. Your 93 is incredible. Your 96 is incredible. And it's winemaking, they're your babies. You got to take care of them. So anyway, here I am going to 2020, making Cabernet this year. A little bit of Sonoma Coast Chardonnay from Charlie Heitz's vineyard. I do about 5 or 6 tons from Charlie. And I do that in a French white Burgundy style. That also is whole clustered, barrel fermented for 2 years in Francois Frere and a couple of other Ramon barrels and what have you. And those are never, ever racked. They sit on their lees. And all this can be done. And we're lucky that we can do this. So anyway, that's my spiel. Arnswinery.com is our website. Info on Arns Winery is our email. Call us, come by. I do tours by appointment. Anyway, that's my story. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Before the winemakers go away and we bring out the Gilberts, well, not go away, but before we bring out the Gilberts, we've got a couple of audience questions that pertain specifically to the wine. So I thought this would be a better moment to address them. The first two are for Celia. So Celia, if you could get ready to speak. One of the audience members asks how you chose the name for your wine. And then another person wanted to know how you determined the blend.
Thanks. Both very good questions. So the naming my wine was by far the most difficult part of it. I had my first vintage in bottles, but without labels because I couldn't come up with a name. So what did I do? I went over to the Napa Valley Library, so the Signaling Library where the Napa Wine Library is, right down the block from my office. It was a very short walk. And I have a little bit of Irish blood on both sides. So I looked at a book of Irish mythology, and some of the names in traditional Irish are very hard to pronounce. I couldn't imagine trying to order that wine off a wine list with all the GRLF kind of combinations. But the name Corra stood out to me in part because that was my grandmother's name. And Corra was an Irish goddess who represented prophecy. So I thought, you know, as I'm walking through the vineyards, especially this time of year, and I'm trying to determine what these wines are going to be like and how I can best help to guide them on their path, I'm creating something that will be appreciated down the road in a place and a time that I can't quite imagine. And so paying homage to the goddess of prophecy seemed to make sense to me. We're really creating something that is going to travel into the future before it's fully developed. So Corra, it was, and the white wine that I make is non-varietal. It's a relatively, I tried to make it a third of the three varieties, and the Riesling was a little too strong most years. So I rebalance the varieties each year, kind of depending on what the vintage gives me. And I'm trying to have them all be equal parts in the blend in terms of their impact to the blend. But sometimes that means one gets dialed up and another gets dialed back a little bit. This particular one is 40% Muscat, 35% Riesling, and 25% Viognier. But more typically, for the last couple of vintages, the Viognier has actually been the dominant player. So I just kind of rework the blend each year based on what the vintage has given me. So that's not a varietal effort. So I needed to come up with a fanciful name for the blend. And I was remembering the women in Europe in, say, the 1900s to 1920s that used to wear these beautiful big hats with egret plumes hanging off of them, and the way that they, you know, they would walk and the feathers would just kind of waft in the air. And I just thought that's the kind of very, very light elegance that I'm trying to capture with this wine. So the name of the wine is called Tail Feathers for that reason.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for that. Another question that I think is like a great one, considering everything that's going on, is everyone's wineries open right now? So if everybody could just go through and say yes, and maybe what the hours are right now.
Let's see.
Well, I'm Pam Starr, Crocker and Starr Winery. We're open by appointment only. And of course, we're outside, and come and sit in our Adirondack chairs and watch the vines grow and the grapes ripen. We'd be happy to have you.
I'm Celia, and I don't have a tasting room per se. If you happen to be in the Napa Valley and I'm not working on production or out in the vineyards that day, you know, info@corrawines.com will get to me, and let me know if you're visiting, if you're interested in the wines.
And we're open. We have lots of space outside and overlooking the Kronos Vineyard, and everybody's having a good time and staying very safe.
Pride Mountain Vineyards, we're also open by appointment only, seeing limited groups outside, very safe, very carefully, and just happy to have some visitors back again, because it's been a long, I guess, 5 months now of lonely production work without our visitors. So yeah, welcoming people back again.
Sandi, are you guys open?
Yeah, I'm open. I'm me. You're looking at it. There's no one there but me and 2 yellow labs. And I do tours by appointment. And I must admit, we have a really successful mailing list. And there's some cool people on it. And when they're in town, they call me and I go, come by. And the popular thing today is we have a swimming pool that's huge and it's warm. But yeah, info at Arns Winery or Sandi at Arns Winery, and we'll hook up a time, an hour.
Wonderful.
Well, make an appointment.
Huh?
I said I'd like to make an appointment, please.
Bring your swimsuit.
Great. Well, let's bring on the Gilberts and talk about this wonderful book that brought us all here together tonight. So we introduced them earlier, but it's Jack and Lucia Gilbert, as they like to be known. And I was hoping that they could kick off this next phase of the evening by talking a little bit about their backgrounds. What do you do professionally other than write this book?
Well, this is what we do professionally. We do research. And so how we got involved with women winemakers is that my research for many years has focused on women working in male-dominated fields, especially engineering and the natural sciences and the applied sciences. And so winemaking, enology is an applied science. So when we moved to California 10 plus years ago, we always loved wine, but we had heard that women winemakers in California had shattered the glass ceiling. And that really attracted us because I thought this could give us, or give me particularly, insights into research of what we could do to help in engineering and other fields. So we went looking for the women winemakers. We had a very hard time finding any. And so we decided to develop our own database of all of the wineries in California and who their winemakers were. And it took a long time. It took us a whole year to do that because there are a lot of wineries. And we learned that only 9.8% of California wineries had a lead women winemaker. And to us, that was very surprising. And we decided just then and there that we had to make the women more visible. And so we established our website. Every woman that we identified, we contacted, tried. We were very successful. I think we got most of them on our website, bios, photos, connections to their websites to the wineries where they produce their wine. And we just keep doing the research. So that's what we're about. We've done a number of studies. And I tell you, we just love all the people we have studied. And we couldn't have done it without them and their insights, and they're connecting us to other people, saying, have you talked to this person, or helping us to understand the difficulties in this. It's a very, so let me say more about the book, and then I'll give Jack a chance to say something. So it took us actually a long time to decide on how to focus the book. We talked to so many women and there was so much information, and we kept thinking, we'll do this and we'll do that. And then finally it dawned on us that the Odysseys, that was what was important. That was a way that we could organize the book around the women's career paths. Now that meant we couldn't include everyone that we had talked with, but at least we could help bring some sort of structure to their careers and maybe be helpful to women in the future, or people in the future, but especially women, about what the career paths look like, what the obstacles were. There are always obstacles, and the decisions that these women winemakers had made. So that's what our book is. It's tons of information. If you don't like detail and information, it's probably not a book for you, but it might be a book you can give to someone who likes that. So Jack, do you want to add to that?
What I want to add is some element of how difficult it was to identify the lead winemakers who were women. We would go to tasting rooms and ask the question, do you know any women winemakers? And the person would pause for a while and say, well, I can't give you any names, but there must be some.
I heard about one. Anyway, what we have.
Good. Well, I read in your book that I think you said that your research started in 2011.
That's correct.
At what point did you decide to turn it into a book, and how long did that process take?
Well, we didn't actually decide that until about 1.5 years ago. And then it took us a year, maybe 2 years ago, and it took us over a year to write the book.
Okay.
And had we to do it again, I think we'd still write the same book. Because
that's great.
Yeah, we just love it. We love it. And actually, I think a turning point also was when we decided that we really needed to look beyond California. A number of the winemakers we talked with, as the people you all said tonight, you all went to other places. You went to Australia, you went to New Zealand, you went to France, you went to Germany. And so we thought we needed to expand our horizons too. And so we spent 2 to 3 years visiting other cultures and other countries. And it really helped us to get a better appreciation of California and the winemakers in California, but also a wider perspective of how we could do the book. Because the California story, in many ways, is a universal story. And we could then include these other winemakers from other cultures, especially in the career paths. So that was a gift to us.
Another challenge was how to focus the book. And we talked several years ago about a book, but could never figure out how to do the focus. And I'll have to say Lucia did a fantastic job of organizing the book around pathways. And there is a universality, really, of pathways. And that is captured, I think, very well in our book.
Yeah, I thought that was a particularly interesting part. I also, I have to say, my favorite part, I think, unsurprisingly, is the bit at the end where you talked about one of the things that you kept hearing from female winemakers around the world was that they had to work twice as hard, they had to be twice as informed, be twice as good at your job. And so you kind of actually measured performance, I think, in terms of scores, to wineries that had female winemakers versus those without, and you found that they in fact were higher performing wines on average. Yeah, I thought that was just wonderful. I'd like a printout of that chart for my wall. But beyond that kind of one data point, and then obviously the initial surprise of there being less than 10% female winemakers in California, what was the most surprising discovery you made over the course of your research?
Well, I would think the most surprising was that there were so few women. Mm-hmm. And then when we discovered, when doing that, the second and third studies of how successful their wines are, that, we made all the more us wanting to make visible the women winemakers and their wines. Right. So I think another important discovery was the international, the cultural parts. And actually, in some ways, how California was sort of a mentor in some ways. Everyone kind of looked to what was happening in California to say, well, how are we doing? And I think that's been an aspirational thing that's been important. The percentage of women winemakers is higher especially in certain areas of California than in any of the wine regions we visited. And that has helped them to also move forward in their own country. So I think California is a big player. And actually, UC Davis is a big player, more so in the past, I guess, than now, since there are other very, very good programs. but for first couple of chapters of our book is UC Davis, UC Davis, UC Davis.
Sure, sure. Well, I know that your research was very specifically focused not just on winemakers, but on lead winemakers, on head winemakers and wineries, which is, part of the reason why you ultimately had, I think, a small sample set of women. But surely in the course of your research, you must have anecdotally absorbed a feeling of female representation in other aspects of the wine business. And we've actually had a couple of audience questions about that, talking about women in the vineyards, vineyard managers. Somebody even asks, can your next book address women in the field?
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah. So first of all, so get on that, please. And then also, what is your general impression? I understand you don't have the data, but what is your general impression about other elements of grape growing and wine production as far as female representation goes?
I can respond to that, not necessarily in a very quantitative way, but clearly our focus is on women who are lead winemakers. That's what we studied, and it was difficult getting that information, and I would just say in general that was a big enough challenge. To go on to the viticulturalists, as we've done our research, occasionally the name of a woman who is a viticulturist will surface. We are keeping a running list of who those people are, and maybe in the future there will be a basis for doing, a real in-depth research project on females who are in the viticulture area.
I think it's interesting. I'd be interested to hear the winemakers here talk about that, because from what we can gather, it's certainly a much smaller percentage of the people who are running the viticulture companies, so to speak, and who are the lead viticulturists. We talked, well, I won't drop names, but we talked to some women who, everyone would love them to be their viticulturists, but they seem to be small in number. And we don't know exactly why, except that agriculture is a very traditional field, and it's probably for women harder to break into that field than some other aspects of traditional male-dominated fields. But I would be maybe we can bring that up later.
Sure, absolutely. Well, it kind of, leads to another one of the questions that I put here is that, you speak a lot about how, in the early days, in the 60s and the 70s, specifically in California, that many hopeful female winemakers were relegated to laboratory work, or if not, I'm sure sales, tasting room, stuff like that, rather than kind of being encouraged to pursue field work or cellar work. Obviously that is still alive and well today, that kind of gender funneling. But what do you think, are the major gender stereotypes as pertains to suitable job positions that persist in wine today?
Well, that's another question I think I would really like to hear the winemakers speak about, because I agree with you. When we go around, we still see more women doing the lab work. We see more women in the cellar, but we also see that the majority of people in the cellar are men. So I think change is happening, and I think this is maybe something that Cathy said, or maybe Zama Long said, or who knows who said it. But when you see women performing in sort of out of role behavior, so out of role behavior being in a cellar, and you see, Cathy, using her gymnastic skills to work in the cellar, and the men are going, maybe we can learn from her. We got back problems. I think that you begin to see women performing in these in roles, and then it becomes then a in-role behavior for women. So I think the more we have of women and men engaging in out-of-role behavior that now becomes part of their own identity as a man or a woman, I think we're going to begin to see more changes than maybe we have today.
Well, and this ties back to your idea of visibility being key to change, right? A representation being important, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'd love for you to talk about this one graph in the back. Let me see if I can find it easily. But you had a graph that I loved that charted basically within given wineries, whether when they had a female winemaker, whether they replaced her with a man or kept a woman or replaced a man with a woman. Can you talk about why that chart is significant to you and what it kind of means to you?
Okay, so what we always look for are books that give us history, especially history that tells us about winemakers and owners, so we can get a sense of tracking these wineries. So we came across a wonderful book, which is by Laube, of I forget the name of it now, but the best winemakers, the best wineries in California. And we thought, oh my goodness, well, let's look to see, this book was written in 1999. Let's look to see who these people have as these wineries have as their winemaker now in 2015. And so we looked them all up, we called them, we got all this information. And what we were interested in is whether they went from a male winemaker to a male winemaker, which is status quo, whether they went from the very few female winemakers at that time to a male winemaker or to another female winemaker, or whether they went from a male winemaker to a female winemaker. And so changing from what we were hoping to see, I don't know, to see real change, we think we have to see more male winemaker to male winemaker and male winemaker to female winemaker being about the same. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't know what we would find, but we did see that the male winemaker to female winemaker was pretty common. I mean, the dominant one was male winemaker to male winemaker, but there were a sizable percentage was male winemaker to female winemaker. And so you're going to ask us later, well, what are we studying now? And see, that's a really important question to us, is how do we assess change in the industry, and structural change, fundamental change. And so we are very curious, and we are actually tracking wineries that had traditionally always had male winemakers, and now they have a female winemaker, and in the stories about that.
About those transitions.
Yeah, about those transitions.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We have a question from the audience that I think is kind of interesting. They said, what have you learned that you think can be applied to other professions?
Well, I feel like I'm doing all the talking.
Well,
quite,
okay.
yeah, this is what I've done my whole life, right? But I think that one of the things that's really interesting is that there are similarities across the professions, and so the barriers to women winemakers are probably going to be similar to the barriers in other fields, because they're embedded in the structure and culture of the society. And so all that we've learned here, I think, will at least help me in understanding other fields. And right now, what I learned in other fields has really helped me with this project, because I'm not a winemaker, and so I really brought my knowledge of gender and psychology to studying women winemakers.
Right.
Can I add something about the vineyard management side and the practitioners in the vineyard? Women used to make up barely 10%. They now make up 25% of those in vineyards. They have proven to be more adept at.
Yeah. So
the vineyard workers. They have proven to be more adept at suckering in the niceties of dropping fruit or of canopy management. They are deft, exact, fast, and caring. This is a major change. But when you have Christian Weeks praising his ladies, you know that you have superiority of performance. And that is continuously underway. There are more women in vineyards at work because they have the same, you mentioned earlier, the wine being your children, you have to manage them. The vines, the same way, an attention to detail, a finesse, a not watching the clock kind of thing, getting it done precisely. And I also am very proud to say, with this organization I consult for with its events and writing, that our annual tasting in August has 60 to 70 Napa Valley wineries that pour. And those wines that are poured, 20% are made by women winemakers. So I can't tell if it's because that's Napa Valley or that's Napa Valley Wine Library, but that is the scope of the rose that blooms at the annual tasting.
Diana, I have to say that some of the characteristics you provided for the women working in the vineyards, that is their precision, care, and so on, I think reflects why they're often initially, or women are hired into the lab tech position, because again, their quantitative skills, their care in doing the analyses is greater than possibly a male would provide.
Right. Well, one more question just for you guys, and then I wanna open it up to all the winemakers to chime in. But we talked, I think, about your next big research project, unless you want to go into more detail. But I'm interested in some of your international research, because obviously you make the case that California is a fairly progressive leader in terms of female representation. So as you were taking stock of the other wine growing regions of the world, you know, what areas did you feel were the least progressive? What areas do you feel were the more progressive? You know, paint a picture.
Well, I wish we had visited more areas than we have. We mostly visited European countries and then New Zealand. And I would say, and I think Jack and I discussed this, that New Zealand, definitely the most progressive. And then I would say the European countries, you know, Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, were all about the same, and not quite where California is, especially in Napa and Sonoma and Santa Barbara County, but certainly they all have organizations of women who are trying to improve the situation for women through mentoring, education, and so forth.
Okay, well, great. Well, that leads naturally, I think, into my first question for the open panel. Obviously, please continue to contribute, Lucia and Jack. But I'm interested in hearing from some of the women on the female winemakers on the panel and what you think. I mean, the Gilberts make the point that the glass ceiling is alive and well, right? 10% is not such a hot number. It's better in certain regions, but you know, it's by no means reflective of the general population. So what do you all, who are, I think, inarguably trailblazers, feel would be the single most crucial factor for breaking that once and for all?
Well, I just posted in the comments, I observed that all four of you all started your own brands. I mean, do you feel that that is something that you had to do in order to be successful, or was that something that you worked hard for and were then able to achieve? I briefly had my own brand, but I love making wine and I hate selling wine, so I quickly abandoned that when I joined the team at Pride. But yeah, I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, I'd love to just do a quick brief on the glass ceiling. I'm not sure that I actually started my own winery because I didn't think I could move up in the world. I think it was just sort of an odd opportunity for me, and so that was my way of expanding into all aspects of becoming not just a winemaker who had to stare down the face of all my judges at the table, but also I had to figure out how to put my business game on. But I'd like to address the glass ceiling a little bit and just say that I don't know how or And there's so many generations that need to be taught that boys and girls are equal, that they should be encouraged to both play with trucks and both play with dolls. And so we need to look at each other like we're really amazing, talented, smart humans. I've learned a lot over the decades, and hiring a staff has probably been my biggest education. I have an all-female team. I have passed on my winemaking title to a very smart woman named Evan Cameron. She is our head winemaker. She does all the decisions. I'm the founding winemaker and the creator of the company. And I think that's part of maybe what I never intended to take our company and say, well, let's just be all women wine people. But I did feel like we hired the best people for the job. And so I have 7 women working for the company of Crocker and Starr. Evan hired a cellar master and a viticultural expert. Her name is Katie Rouse, and she has a fabulous degree in viticulture, master's degree. And so through just sort of the thread of people knowing each other, I think, and I've heard this in other businesses as well, and recently I've been doing some financial seminars. It's very interesting to hear that we are very much a paralleling universe with classic businesses and professions. And so I think opening up the opportunity now that I have a company, I don't think we're female focused, but we seem to draw them. And I think that's going to be helpful for the future of women rising into decision-making roles.
I'd like to mention that I think way back in 1987 when am I live?
Yes, you're good.
Yeah. In 1987, when I decided to start making my own wine and eventually break loose of Chapelet, I think it was on my mind that perhaps there would be more opportunity. And I knew I wanted to have a family, and I knew that it would be much more flexible. The work doesn't go away. You can choose any 17 hours a day you want to work. But I think it was conscious for me to start my own business, knowing that I could make opportunity for myself. That's all.
Yeah, I can see that. Sandi, do you have any?
Yeah, ditto to Cathy. I'm of the same box. I have always walked my own path, and I have worked with some real egotistical men in my life. And, Australia takes the #1 hit. But I've also worked with men in the Napa Valley as a college student. I drove Hopewell one year with 6 other ladies down in Woodin Valley because we were all getting paid top dollar, whatever that meant. But we also had guys out in the vineyard, and they were really appreciative of our skills and our talents, and I learned a lot about grape growing and what have you. But yeah, I beat to my own drum. I want to run my own show, and if it fails because I let it fail. But I'm not going to let that happen. And I love doing what I do. And it's you got to love what you're doing. And if you love what you're doing, it's pretty darn cool.
Now, Celia, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a pretty long-standing mentorship program, don't you, at Corra?
Yes, I one of the reasons that I wanted to start my own brand was to be able to, bring in other aspiring winemakers and train them in my methodology, show them how I taste wines and how I approach blending and so forth. So I've had, and not just female, I would say I've probably had more women working for me than men, but not exclusively so. Full-time assistants and then also harvest interns. And I really do want to be able to share what I've learned along the way. As they say, as you're climbing up that ladder, you've got one hand on the next ring and the other hand is reaching back, pulling the next person up. So that's been a thought that has stayed with me always. And I believe that that's essential to continue, not only to break the glass ceiling, but to continue this stream of great, talent that just needs a little bit more development by people with a little more seasoning. And whether that's, women, whether it's people of color, whatever, we need to diversify the pool a little more, because that's where we're going to get better wines.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, a little bit along those lines, we have a question from the audience for the Gilberts, and that they wanted to know if you did any breaking down along representational lines of women in color in these lead winemaking roles that you were studying.
Okay, sorry, we were muted. No, we did not do that. I think if you actually go to our website and look at all the women, you can see, I would say there's quite a lot of diversity. There's less diversity among African-American women. I think we have 3 women on our website who are African-American. We have a number of Hispanic, Asian, women with backgrounds from India, other countries. Jack, do you want to jump in?
I can't jump. I mean, the bottom line is we have not done that kind of an analysis. We just put up the people that we know are lead winemakers, and there are some African Americans and other minorities, but we have not done a calculation of how many of each variety there are.
Well, it's interesting that, kind of circling back to your graph that I was talking about how, since women generally have to work so hard to prove themselves, there seems to be the higher performing wineries. There's so many studies now that, companies or corporations or boards that have diversity in terms of racial representation tend to be more successful in whatever they're doing, I assume, for the same reasons. Do anyone on the winemaking side of things want to talk about any diversity initiatives they might be a part of or thinking about?
Well, I think we have a great opportunity and also responsibility in wine country. We are agriculture, and agriculture in California, it's still largely driven by Latino laborers. And so just working hand in hand with my team, I've seen it through this pandemic. These are the essential workers. These are the people who don't have the luxury to stay home and isolate, and they're carpooling, sometimes long distances, working long days in the sun, just really selfless. And this is coming after years of fires, power outages, earthquakes. I just feel like the people who work in production and agriculture have been through a lot. And for me, this has been really eye-opening working through this pandemic, because I almost feel like I'm privileged to be an essential worker, because I'm able to really see what people are living through and experiencing. And I think that, I'm very much a proponent of the Black Lives Matter movement, but I think that also in wine country, where so much of what we do is completely reliant on our Latino laborers, that we really need to also be focused on that and do what we can to advocate for people and to support them and to, recognize talent and promote talent too, and give people opportunities.
Yep, absolutely. We've got a couple more audience questions that I want to be able to get the time for everybody to address. A guy named Scott writes in, how do you envision Napa changing or not changing in the next 10 to 20 years? Any insights or trends to share? So why don't we start with the Gilberts? Do you feel like, let's talk about that question specifically through the lens of gender representation, and then let's move on to the rest of the panel to speak more broadly about wine trends.
Well, go ahead, Jack.
My input here would be, we're always amazed by the percentage of women who are in the viticulture and enology program at UC Davis. It's been 50-50 for a number of years. Now, admittedly, when you graduate with a degree, you don't instantly become a lead winemaker. You have to sort of go through the ranks. But I think it's been long enough now that some of these women, and some have, but I mean more of these women should be rising to the lead winemaker position. And that would be my prediction of what's going to happen in the next 15 or 20 years in the Napa Valley, which is a very popular endpoint for these women from UC Davis, that there will be an increase as they make their way up through the ranks.
Well, amen to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that Napa is unique in some ways. You all are in Napa, so you can respond more to this. It's so expensive. People with very deep-pocketed people come in, they buy land, they have grapes, or however, they're doing their winery, their labels. It's getting more and more exclusive. Looking at the price of some of the cabs is pretty impressive. And so I think that the other issue with Napa is, to a certain degree, who's going to want to work there as a lead woman winemaker? I don't know. It's just, so if you don't have your own winery, and maybe Sally, you're more in connection with people who are, you're at a family-owned winery, and so that's a very special place to be. And I guess what most of the wineries in Napa are, or in California, are family-owned, or a large percentage. But I just, the rising cost, I just wonder how that's going to impact the number of winemaking positions that become available and that people compete for.
What about the winemakers? Any comments on trends and movements in the next 10 to 20 years, Celia?
Yeah, I think that there's been a huge trend since I started in the business. When I first came out of Davis, all of us were looking to work for small family-owned wineries that were making somewhere between 25 and 60,000 cases. And those were littering the valley all the way up and down Highway 29 and the Silverado Trail. And most of those are gone, not all of them, but many of those have been absorbed into Kendall Jackson, Constellation, Treasury, Foley family. There are a ever shrinking number of small family-owned wineries anymore. The corporations are, because of the economies of scale, they're able to put out a product at a very competitive rate. They have a lot of land. It's a hard model to compete against. So there have been more really, really small wineries, and that's kind of where I found my niche, and I think most of us on this panel today have. And then there are a lot of, or there's a handful of really, really large corporations. And I guess one of my fears is that we may lose some of our, really unique little corners of the valley. Those identities are so important. The personalities of each little, Pam Starr works with fruit that's probably less than a mile away from Cathy's, and yet the wines are so different, and they're both absolutely exquisite products. But those into a 250,000 blend at Beringer, you lose that specialness, and I have a lot of concern about that.
I wonder if the rising cost of doing business in Napa and the increasing presence of corporations will have an effect on gender diversity. I know that in my career as a sommelier, and while that position has evolved and changed as well, men were generally more comfortable laying out big sums of money for bottles of wine from other men, from male sommeliers. And I'm wondering if anybody has any insight or comments on the ability of women winery owners to get loans, to get financial support, to find financial partners. Does anybody want to weigh in on that?
I as a partnership, I have to say that I didn't have a lot of money when I met Charlie, and everything now that I own is in the winery. But I wouldn't do it any differently. But I have to say that I think we need to encourage young scientists and burgeoning winemakers to look for opportunities outside of just themselves. And I think there's going to be a rise of partnerships, because there are people who have land and grapes and they really don't know what to do with them. And they might have these vineyards for decades in their family, and without selling out to a large corporation, they are looking for partners and young people who could be guided. We have a lot of consultants who can help guide those young people in their youth, in their early years of winemaking. And I think the collaboration is going to come back in the next 10 to 20 years. When we had the blow up of the .com era, I think we lost sight of research. We could speak to the lack of research in rootstock development, lack of research and collaboration when it comes to experimentation and global warming of new grape varieties. But I think to address the comment about young winemakers coming out of UC Davis that are smart. I mean, they're like super smart, right? But there is a practical aspect to the winemaking business that I think they could actually collaborate with a grower who has a lot of skill and experience with many, many vintages of different weather patterns. And I hope that we can bring partners together, because I think, like Celia addressed, the very distinctive, unique corners of the Napa Valley. And I guess we're not really corners, we're a big circle. But I think that they will be rediscovered, and there will be a new fingerprint, an expanded fingerprint about the impact of this new winemaker and the older grape grower. I think that's going to happen. Collaboration is what we're on a road to collaboration. We discuss it all the time, and I think COVID has brought it back to the surface. And that's where I think women are superior in this rank, because our egos, we tend to suppress them, and I think that's a fantastic thing. But Kelly, why weren't you selling $1,000 bottles of wine to other women? Go get them, girl. Right? So, it's only money, and it's only a bottle of wine, but you know what, when we present it the right way. So I'm excited about the next 10 years. I think we're going to encourage this collaboration.
Well, I think that's wonderful, and that actually leads into another question I wanted to ask. And in that, what do you think that women in particular bring to the wine industry that might be unique and special? Pam, why don't you start?
I'd be happy to, Kelly. I think that women have an amazing ability to endure. I don't know what happened at childbirth when we came out as girls, but we have the power to endure pain. We don't mind being told no, because we just say to ourselves, gee, that's just no for now, and that's no with you. I'm just going to move on. And we have the ability to collaborate without losing our uniqueness and our distinction. And I think that speaks volumes to retaining the art of winemaking, the science of winemaking, and the collaboration of it.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'd like to hear from the Gilberts. Do you want to weigh in on this question?
Well, I think I would agree with Pam in that it's that working twice as hard. And I think that women just have, when they have a vision of what they want to do, they're going to do it. And I think for at least the women we've talked with, the work ethic, the vision, and I think the collaboration of how to get where they're going to go, as Celia said, one rung up and one, yeah, I mean, I think that all of that is the case. So I agree. I'm just loving listening to everyone.
I think it all boils down to attention to detail. And if there is a difference between genders, I think that perhaps women are better at attention to detail. And it's everything in the vineyard all the way through the winery. Perhaps that's the difference.
I would agree with that. I think, as somebody pointed out to me, you look at a schoolyard of kindergartners, and the girls will be looking at the heels on Barbie's shoes, and the boys will be taking their lunch boxes and twirling themselves to be as big as they possibly can be. So, I think that's part of it. The details are so important in the vineyard and in the winery. But the other part of that, I think, that touched on a little bit, and maybe I could just elaborate a little bit, is that if you're if I'm not so invested in my image and my ego, it frees me to ask a lot of questions. And all of you winemakers here, you all know that I have come to you with, gosh, you know, I've got this situation, I haven't seen it before. Have you seen that before? Because I'm kind of stumped, and having no shame in asking the question. That's everything I've learned in the vineyards has been because I was wanting to learn from every vineyard manager that would spend 2 minutes with me, asking, you know, dumb questions about why they're irrigating this particular way or why the canopy is designed in a particular fashion. And without that ego barrier, you can learn a lot more, and you can learn a lot faster from pros.
Totally agree with that. I actually just texted someone today because I'm doing something new this year. I'm making a rosé that's not a Saignée, and so I'm reaching out to people. And I'm 46, but I love that I'm still open-minded and able to learn. And I think that's one thing that, you know, generally people, not necessarily a male-female thing, but like we haven't had this handed to us. We're not entitled. We have worked hard for it, and we recognize all the effort that we've had to put into getting where we are. And maybe part of that is being control freaks. I know that I am too. And also, you know, being able to put our ego down when we need to maybe work somebody to get what we want. I don't know that these are necessarily male-female things, but I do think that we just want to have opportunities. And I think that we're going to do just as well as men, if not better, because we are going to work really hard for it. So I think that it's amazing that Celia has mentored so many people. I try to do the same with my interns, and I've had the opportunity to work with a number of really amazing women from all over the world and see them succeed. And I do, as a mom of a young girl, I have a 10-year-old, and she honestly doesn't think there's anything better or worse about being male or being female. And I have a lot of hope for the future. I hope that we're moving in that direction where, you know, we can be very open, we can choose to express different aspects of our personality. We don't have to focus on male traits, female traits, and we can have just a world that's more open.
I think that's wonderful, and unfortunately there are a few more questions from the audience, typically specific winemaking questions that maybe we can answer offline with the library's help and contact the authors of the questions. But there is one comment that just came in from the audience that I think is a great kind of closing comment, and somebody writes in, "We have 3 granddaughters, ages 5, 3, and 10 months. Who wants them? Because we will gladly send them to study winemaking." So we're a little ways away for them, but someone to keep on your radar. But I want to thank everyone, especially the Gilberts, for giving us a really great reason to get together and have this wonderful conversation. Again, their book is amazing. Please do check it out, and I'm gonna hand it back over to Diana to sign us off. But good night, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the wines and the conversation.
Thank you all for your sparkling participation behind the scenes. I wanted to thank Rick Brennan, who has technically guided us all this way, the stone skipping across the lake, Michael Merriman, and Brett Van Emst, who are members and with expertise, who kept saying, yes, it is humanly possible for the Napa Valley Wine Library to create a virtual Books on Wine evening. And so we have. I'm very happy for everyone's interest and support. Please let's have this be the model on which we go forward from, because it is a really extraordinary medium that is just a patch on what winemaking and wine growing is like. But at least it gives us some access. And in conclusion, I'll tell you, I've always thought that men think like knives, women think like forks, and children think like spoons. Thank you all very much for a wonderful and delicious evening.